In this video, I'm going to take a look at the two sample position papers included in this week's module. I think both of them are pretty good examples of how you use sources to develop reasons. You'll notice that the body paragraphs begin with topic sentences that introduce reasons, and the sources show up deeper in the paragraph. You want to keep your sources out of the first sentence of your paragraph and bring them in later in to support the reasons. Your sources aren't the reasons. They should be backing up your reasons. I think this first one, the one on police-race relations, the second one that we'll look at is on paying for college. I think this is a really good example of a good first draft. If I had the opportunity to conference this with the student, I think there are 2 or 3 things I'd really point out, and one of them would save a significant amount of at least 1, maybe 2 letter grades. So pay attention when we get to how the sources are cited. Strengths of this, I think this first paragraph is an excellent example of how you introduce the background of an issue, and I really am impressed with this line of thinking where pointing out that like a lot of issues facing our country, that this is something that kind of breaks along a right or wrong, yes or no kind of side, and just the simple acknowledgement that that the problem is more complicated than that is this is a first step, I think, to any successful paper. The claim itself, the current state of police-race relations, stems from a history of systemic racism in American police policies and cannot be improved without acknowledging and addressing said history. I think that works really well as a claim. Until we do this, we can't make progress on the other things. That's a reasonable claim, and I think a good way to get at this issue, one that just seems to stay in the news almost week after week after week. Then looking at the reasons, there's a statistical disparity in police treatment of minorities and whites, and then you see the source, Edwards and others, shows up to provide the research for that. Another source, Davis, contributes as well. So that's a really good habit of mine, a good academic writing technique. One source and then another source that confirms it. Don't rely too heavily on one source. Second paragraph introduces how this affects communities at a subconscious level, and again, a source, in this case McNeely, comes in and supports that. So that's the sort of pattern you want to establish in your body paragraphs. If we go a little farther in here is a one that connects this now to America's history of police-race relations. It began with the slave patrols. So that certainly extends this way back in history, but shows that this is a deep-rooted issue. There's a source here, Cooper, that is brought in to provide evidence for that. Now, the 2 areas that I think I would want to point out to the student, one might be the way of getting at that opposing viewpoint. The technique that the student uses here is really, to begin with, this dismissing it. America's history of racism is no secret, but the shame it evokes makes it difficult to bear. It is easier to forget and shove under the rug, but it will not be easily hidden. Very often, when I catch my children doing something they ought not to do, one will shout, "They did it first," or "They started it," and that sort of becomes the root of this presenting what I think is supposed to be the opposing viewpoint. I think it's an example where it would be a lot more effective to find a source that presents this viewpoint, and then maybe use this, well, that's just a kind of childish, "they did it first," or "they started it," or whatever response to it. So lacking a source that represents the opposing viewpoint, I think, is something that is usually weakens the paper. The more important problem this paper has is one that is kind of difficult to see when you read through the paper, because for the most part it does a really good job of introducing the sources and citing them. You'll see that there are a variety of signal phrases throughout. Clearly identifies Jonathan Cooper writes. That's a good one. When Cooper continues, Cooper writes, that we may be quoting Cooper a little too much in that particular paragraph. Back up here, McNeely et al. Conducted a study on the effects, etc., and I think we saw the other two sources before. The problem is this, and it's a problem that I often see in these papers, but it is certainly something you want to double-check, triple-check, and make sure it doesn't happen. You saw McNeely earlier in the paper cited as a source, but McNeely doesn't appear on the works cited page. Edwards is cited in the paper, Davis is cited in the paper, Cooper is cited in the paper, but this Alang is not. Now, it is possible that Alang refers to the study McNeely did. Let's assume that's the case. If it is the case, then simply what we would want to do here is probably keep the McNeely signal phrase, because after all, it was McNeely's group there that does the research. So McNeely et al. Conducted a study to show somewhere at the end of that, right in here probably, is where we would just have the parenthetical citation with Alang's name. That would cover this. Or maybe a better way to do it is Siri Alang pointed to a study by McNeely et al. Which showed. That's maybe a better way to do it. In that sentence, then, I indicate that Siri's the source, Alang is the source I'm using. Alang is the one referencing McNeely. That's where this information on McNeely's study comes from. Not the original McNeely, but through Alang. Still, your responsibility to make sure that every source cited on the works cited page is included in the paper, and vice versa. In fact, one of the things I did was use the search function. Find Cooper, Davis, Edwards, they all show up in the text of the paper. Alang only shows up on the works cited page. McNeely only showed up in the paper, not on the works cited page. So be sure that you, like I said, double, triple check that all the sources on your works cited page are actually included in your paper. And that's the danger of just pasting in your working bibliography as your works cited page. They're very rarely identical. You're not going to use all the sources you find in that working bibliography. If we take a look at the second paper, again, I think a really good model for you to follow. This one does a tremendous job, I think, of integrating all the different sources. The one thing I would simply tell the student is a couple of things. Here's a pattern of signal phrase that this student uses. So let me go down to the works cited page real quick and show you which source we're using. All right, so the source here is this Matarazzo. Okay, that's the source. And Matarazzo here is included in the first paragraph. Now, one of the things you definitely want to do is if you create the signal phrase this way, in an article by Matarazzo, she cites. If you have the pronoun she right next to the noun it replaces, well, don't do that. We want to rewrite this so it simply says Matarazzo claims, cites, suggests, says, whatever. So you could do it this way. In her article, Matarazzo cites, that would be a better way to do it. Okay, but it is important. MLA style does require you to use the author's full name the first time the source is referenced. So here we would have Matarazzo, and you'll see that a lot of times the student just introduces the last name with that first one. All right, not necessarily. Beyond that, though, all the other sources are cited. The sources provide lots of numbers and statistical information. And that in a topic like that is going to be really, really important. So here's the case where Powell goes in the name of the source shows up here. Powell is on the works cited page. And here's a case where the student does very successfully what was done maybe unsuccessfully in the previous one. Here's a case where the study is done by Korn Ferry Hayes group. I've seen that before, so I think it's some kind of think tank or research institute or something. Well, that's fine. All right, so they've done the study. Here's what the study found. And then at the end of this, there is in the parenthetical citation is from Doyle, because Doyle's the name on the works cited page that we've got to connect this to. All right, so Allison Doyle has maybe read that original study, and she's the one who summarizes it. That's where our student found it, so Doyle's the one that has to show up on there. Again, in formatting the works cited page, It was works cited, alphabetized. They're the hanging indents, and here I think you can sort of see the importance of the hanging indent. If I'm looking for one particular name, Kirkham, or if I'm looking for Powell, then it's easier for those names to stand out when we create those hanging indents. Okay? So, 2 models. I think, again, both of them are fine papers. I wish I would have had the opportunity to conference with the first one to point out those 2 areas of weakness that could have been easily revised to get that article in A. Okay, well, thanks for watching. I'll return this up to the top, and I look forward to reading your first draft and conferencing with you subsequently.